Okay, I've sorted out my little problem with the main shaft. It was everything's fine. Everything's fine. Just had a bit of a wobble. I wasn't sure, and if you're not sure, you need to be sure before you carry on. So what actually happens is the main shaft indeed does not butt up against the gearbox sprocket, which, if you think about it, makes sense because, of course, they're turning at different speeds. So if this was butted up, they'd be wearing against each other. So in fact, it does sit out that much, which just allows the that gear to go in flush with the just as it is now. So it's flush, so we can put the the inner casing on, and then when we put the kickstart ratchet, etc., on the end of the main shaft, that then serves to hold the main shaft in the right place. Simple as that. So everything should be fine. Everything should be fine. Yeah. So when all that gear's on and the inner casing is on, then this gear, the sort of the boss on this gear butts up against the inner bearing race on the cover, and that stops the main shaft going up any further that way, and putting all the kickstart mechanism on this end stops it going that way, and that's what just holds it in position. Simple as that. So it does stick out. Now what happened was, I thought, it didn't look rusty. And I thought, well, that's not been in the open air, so I thought that's why. But of course, there's no oil seal, and so oil and grease is always slightly coming out around this main shaft. So that's why I don't think it had gone rusty. That because it was always got grease on it and oil, and that's why. When I looked at it and cleaned all the grease off, you could see that it was slightly pitted, etc. That it has been sitting in the open air all its life, and that the actual wear on the main shaft lined up with the bushes inside in that position, not fully home, which is where I'd had it. So everything's fine. Okay, so getting ready to fit the inner casing now. Ooh. Okay, so we're getting ready to fit the inner casing. So what I've done is I've poured sort of grease and that down inside the box, not too much because of course I'm going to be working on the box on its side and I don't want all grease coming out, but it is when it's cold it doesn't run much. But this being an earlier box, it does have this plate, this aperture here, which is designed for you to put the grease in, which is not on later boxes. So when the box is all finished and together, I can just put grease down there and keep topping it up, until it's at the right level. So I don't have to worry about stuffing grease in now. But obviously I've put some in. Then the last thing I've done is to fit this sort of pawl here. And what that does is that engages with the selector shaft, so that when the selector shaft turns, there's a spring goes in there, and the cap on the end, which I've not put in yet, and that pushes on the pawl. And so then as you turn the selector fork, which is actually what you do when you move the actual gear lever, then the selector shaft moves round, and then it'll move to the next gear. It will move to this notch here, and then the pull will lock it in position. And as the selector turns, because of the grooves cut in its shaft, as it turns, it moves the selector forks up and down the shaft, and there then in turn there in the dogs and the gear dogs, and it moves the gear dogs up or down inside the gearbox, so selecting different gears. Okay, now I've not put the spring and that in yet, that just so that when it's all together, I can turn the gearbox over and just try and check that the gears are all working. With that pawl in place, with the spring in place rather, it makes the whole gearbox very difficult to turn when it's not on the bike. So I've left the spring and that out but obviously we've got to put the arm on before we put the cover on. But then when it's all together, we've checked it, you know, then I'll put that in later. But it just means that I can try and turn the gears over around and just check that we've got selection, which I've done already, and I'm pretty sure we're fine that we are selecting all gears. You know, so the pull, I think it goes here. So I'll go first, neutral, second, third, and right round the corner. Right round is fourth, and which is normally the case. You're not flat. You know, they get, the notches get further and further apart as the gears go up. Don't ask me how it works, but it does. It seems to be on every gearbox. You've got first, second, first, neutral, second, all very close. Then third and fourth is all the way around, but that works. And so as we turn the selector, then they'll move the forks up and down. The forks will move the gears up and down and select different gears. Right, so we've got the inner casing, and that's got a new bearing. I got this from Seb. I got it ready polished. It was already polished, so that's fine by me. I just, you know, didn't know if I would polish it, but it's already done, so sorted. I've put a new, I've put the other end, this is the lay shaft, the other end of the lay shaft bush. That's the new bush. Seb had already fitted a new output, main shaft bearing, not an output, but a main shaft bearing, inner main shaft bearing. So all I'm going to do is I'm not going to put well seal or whatever on these, because it's grease inside, so it shouldn't leak. I have bought new gaskets again from the Area Owners Club, brilliant, and I'm just going to lightly grease both faces, then we'll put the gasket on, and then we'll get this inner casing fitted, which will be a big milestone. Okay, so I've put a little bit of grease on the mating surfaces, and I've put the new gasket on that I got from the Aerial Owners Club, and then we've got the inner casing, and again I've just greased the mating faces. Obviously we've got the new bush for the lay shaft, we've got the original bush for the gear for the selector shaft, and then there's a new bearing put in for the main shaft, and I've put a little bit of bearing seal on that on this bearing for the main shaft. Okay, let's have a look. Let's see how we get on. Well, I want it to be a bit tight on the main shaft without being too tight, and I know that I know it's not going to spin. It's always a worry that it's going to spin. The main shaft will spin and the bearing stays still. There we are. And then you probably can't see, so I'll try and turn it. So here are the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 studs that we now need to tighten down to fully tighten the inner casing onto the shell. But everything's I think everything's looking okay there. So then I've just got to tighten down these put these 5 nuts on, and we're done. It's the old gasket, by the way, which I was going to use as a template if I couldn't get a new one, but we've got the new one. Right, great. I've immediately hit a problem. Marvellous. I'll have a look. Oh dear. Come back off there. Right. So I've got my bag of inner, carefully labelled inner gearbox nuts. But of course, these were from my original gearbox, and they're three nuts, and they're quite a big diameter. Whereas these are obviously, there's 5, and they're a much smaller diameter. So, okay, good news and bad news as ever. Of course, I didn't have the right nuts for the inner cover, but then I've got my old nuts for the gearbox outer cover, which 4 of which I need 5, and 4 of which fitted the inner cover, which was okay because I've ordered all new stainless steel bolts for the outer cover, so I could reuse those for the inner. And then I used one of the outer cover ones because I only had 4 for the to make up the 5, thinking I could always order another nut at some point. But there's only when I borrowed the nut out of here. This is my gearbox. Sorry, it says it should be gearbox outer. These are my gearbox outer nuts and bolts. That I realised these are all made by Acme Stainless, but I just suddenly realised they're completely not right. They're obviously for a different gearbox. Maybe they're for my old gearbox. I don't know, but they certainly don't fit this. They're way too long and so on. These go obviously all the way through the from the outside. They do the inner and outer, but this is different, so I'll have to get back to Acme, see if I can get some stainless steel ones. The problem is I don't have any of the originals, so I can't use the originals if I wanted to, and also I can't tell Acme, I can't give them the sizes from the old ones because I don't have them. They're not there. So yeah, it's one of those. So I've been able to put the inner cover on using a nut from my new outer casing bolts, but in doing so I realised the outer casing bolts are completely the wrong. They're different. They're for a completely different gearbox. This set, nice stainless steel, but of course they won't fit at all. Anyway, I'll get on now and I'll fit the kickstart, ratchet, etc. on here. So then the kickstart, there's this top hat bush which goes on over the main shaft, and the big spring which fits on there, and over the big spring is the first of ratchet, big ratchet. Yeah, there's the sort of main ratchet, but mine has definitely seen better days, but I don't think that new ones are available. I'll put this on anyway. I could definitely, it'd be really good to replace that because it's the teeth have definitely seen better days, but I don't think it's available. I'll put it on. And then over the top of that, the spline top, okay, and then then we finally put the main shaft nut on, and it's very important the main shaft nut doesn't come undone. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to stop a minute and I'm going to lock up the gearbox using the rear chain so that I can tighten this nut up really tight, because the last thing you want is that nut coming off when you're going along. Other thing I've told you before happened to a friend of mine. He had his wife on the back and he's coming up to a junction really luckily, so he's going to just slowing down, and suddenly the back wheel locked completely, just completely locked, nothing he could do, and he was very lucky. They skidded to a halt. I mean, just a few seconds before, 30 seconds before, he was doing about 50, 60 down the road, but and then it would have been it would have been a catastrophe. Because there's nothing you can do. The back wheel's locked. You're pulling the clutch in, it won't save you at all. It's still locked. And what happened was the nut had come off the end of the main shaft. This was on a Trident, so the main shaft had moved laterally, and so it had locked the gearbox. It had tried to engage 2 gears at the same time, which it didn't like. So it just locks the gearbox. Well, it's after the clutch, so pulling the clutch in doesn't do any good. So the last thing you want is this nut coming off. Right, so I'm just going to stop, and but I was just showing you the assembly because it's going to be like backwards on the bench, and so then we'll do that nut as tight as possible. Okay, so hopefully you can see this. I've got an old chain in the vise, which is clamped to the bench. Chain goes round the gearbox sprocket. Gearbox is in gear, and so that then locks or sprags this sprocket, stops it from turning, and that means hopefully I can then get that nut really good and tight. So we'll see how I get on, because of course everything starts turning. Trying to move across the bench. I've put a block of wood there, so because the gearbox will be pulled into the vise, so just to protect it a bit as it's pulled in. Yeah, that's good. I'm not sure if there's a torque setting on this, but you just really want it very tight. And we got a lot of thread lock. I don't know if I mentioned, I've got a lot of thread lock on there, and so we're okay. Right, so there we're done, and we've got the, you can see that. So that's the main shaft nut now tightly on the gearbox, so on the main shaft. So what I'll do now is I'm going to be turning the gearbox over as best I can, and just get something on the selector shaft, so that I'll just check the actual gearbox is working inside, that we're selecting gears, which I'm sure we are because I checked it before I put this inner cover on. But I'll just check everything's still moving. It all feels like, yeah, it's all moving nicely. I'm fairly sure we're okay. But of course we now looks like we've got another hiatus, which is beginning to annoy me a bit now, because while I order the correct, or try and get hold of somewhere the correct studs and that for the outer gearbox casing.